Hello, I am OmnusI here in my lair, and we are answering another question for the RPG a Day challenge by the RPG Brigade from Facebook. And today is the 13th day of August, which means 13th question. And this one might be a little longer, so grab your popcorn. Describe how your play has evolved. Now, this is something that strikes the heart of the whole role-playing game and what we do here. So I'm going to have to sketch this out a little bit for you. If you're not familiar with role-playing games at this point, basically the flow of a role-playing game goes like this. There's one person generally who's in control of the story, and they are the game master, which is usually me. And everybody else at the table or online or however you do it, it's a more complicated age. But usually, if you're all playing in the same room, all the other people play a character, or possibly a few characters, but usually a character. And they are their advocate and director in the overall story that you're telling. So the characters have a sheet that represents their statistics, abilities, and equipment. The players reference that. There are rules that dictate how things are done and resolved, and that is a role-playing game, essentially. That is the entirety of it. The challenge comes if the game master creates their own things from scratch, using the game's rules as reference points, or if they're running a module, which is a pre-made adventure, which you can buy and put on your GM hat and tell a story for your friends using a game. Now, within those rules, there are lots of different ways of playing. But there's two that I'm going to describe to you right now. Because these two are the way that my game has evolved. When I first started playing, I was used to games. Board games primarily. From chess to Candyland to Risk, Monopoly, a little bit of everything. Mostly your typical Americana board games. So I was familiar with the idea of a game being something that you would try to win at. And when I first heard about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, it was, okay, so you're trying to make a character. You can play multiple sessions, your character gets better and better, and my idea is that you're still trying to win. Your character is trying to survive, beat the monsters, take their treasure, get more experience, and move on. And from just reading it without experiencing it, that was my impression. I didn't understand the concept of the role part just then. Now, when I started playing, which was very sporadic early in the day, I was in the tiny little town of Stevenson, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Let's just say there weren't a lot of people out playing then. This was early in my high school years. But I was lucky enough to meet a few people, and we got to get some playing in. And for the most part, playing in character was figuring out what your character is supposed to do in the concept of a party. The group of player characters is called a party. And everybody has a role. If you have a big sword and you wear heavy armor, your role is probably to have your character up in the front of the group so that he stands between the monsters and the most obvious threats, and then the rest of your party who's not so heavily armored but have their own needs of what they can do. If you are a spellcaster, you are supposed to take your spells that you have and fix problems. If that problem is a whole host of enemies that you can cook with a single fireball, or if it's magically unlocking a door that has a mystic lock upon it, or maybe seeing what's in the next room so that your group isn't ambushed by that dragon that's just waiting for somebody to come in, they're a little bit more challenging to play because they're a lot more subjective and often have a lot more moving parts. So, within these roles, you figure out how best to play your character and work together with the group to try to overcome the obstacles that come up in gameplay. That is called tactical gameplay. It is figuring out how to use the rules to get through the problems. It starts oftentimes with exploration, going into the unknown and uncovering what is hidden that only the game master knows. And then the encounter scenario, which is using your different abilities of your character to overcome a situation. Combat, possibly, using those weapons and armor to fight the monsters. Perhaps spells. Sometimes solving puzzles and riddles. Sometimes it's overcoming and disarming traps. And, of course, every once in a while, you might be able to solve a problem by role play. In this case, that means being in character and talking to a non-player character. Whether that is convincing a guard not to fight you, or wrangling a fat contract from the king, or there's possibly even engaging in a battle of wits with an enchanted doorknob. All things that I've done. But that was mostly less of the encounter. Oftentimes there would be, in almost any module, some situation that would be best dealt with by role play, but that's the trickiest one to adjudicate and to put rules to. It's much easier to tell somebody how you swing a sword and how to find out if you hit and how much damage you do. The role play stuff is usually the stuff that's least talked about in the rules. And early on, that's what I knew, is I knew the rules. You eventually learn them. I first learned by playing with friends. They loaned me the book for a day, which I hadn't read cover to cover, and then they just kind of brought me up to speed with what I knew, what I needed to know. Eventually, I internalized that, and then I learned their roles by watching them, and I internalized that, and then I read the rules, and that made everything more concrete. So that when I would go forward and play with other people and such, I knew the rules better as a result. And I think that's how a lot of people learn the game. Now, fairly early on in role-playing, that was how most people played. You had a dungeon, maybe you had a town that you could go and rest in and heal up. You would possibly go to a friend's house with your character and try their dungeon and maybe go to another person's dungeon. You would test your character and your play skills against the unknown and the various challenges therein. But some people decided that there should be more to a game than that. And many of the early adventures had elements of storytelling in them. There was an entire story that's spelled out through the course of a given adventure. It isn't just you go into a dungeon because the dungeon is there and there are monsters and treasure. And after a while, I started noticing a change. Combat is fine. Combat is great. You need some combat. It provides threat. It provides drama. It provides a reason to have all of those wonderful abilities and statistics and the treasure you've been giving out. Sure, absolutely. Some people still track their progress by how much loot they have, what level they're at, how many hit points they have, and so on and so forth. But over the years, I have turned to a different style primarily. That style is called the narrative style of gameplay, or narrativistic. And the whole point of that is less concentration on the combat and encounters, little bit more of the exploration, bringing the unknown to light for your players, and far more of the role play. I can have an entire night go without a single sword being swung or a spell being cast in anger or in defense. My group can happily sit together and go shopping for their characters, or learn information, crawling throughout a town and poking into the secrets of it, perhaps uncovering a mystery, and then solving it by deduction and interrogation, investigation, things like that. To me, at my age, I've done many dungeon crawls. I don't find them as satisfying as I once did. At least not as the core part of gameplay. I still do enjoy tactical gameplay. As a matter of fact, I run a mega dungeon once a month of my own design that I invite people to come in and take a shot at my favorite local gaming store. But as far as overall with telling a campaign rather than just a pickup game, I'd much rather tell a story. And the thing that really gets me going is not just that I'm the author of a story. That is nice, don't get me wrong, but I can't claim to be the sole author of a story. My players constantly are surprising me, keeping me on my feet, and testing against my story what their characters are going to do. They can go in a completely different direction from what I anticipated, and have, believe me. That is what keeps it all fresh. If they were doing exactly as I wanted them to, time and time again, and I knew exactly what they were doing, and I could game plan perfectly against what they were doing, rather than just having a good idea, well, the whole thing wouldn't be nearly as exciting or interesting. And when the players play to the styles that I enjoy, which is more role playing, and I can see them role playing and making decisions based on their characters' motivations rather than just what makes them stronger or what kind of a build we have here or that's what I enjoy. When I see fully realized characters that my players are playing and enjoying themselves. And ultimately, I generally think that I do a pretty good job of entertaining them. I haven't heard any complaints in a while. So, I'm happy to share this little journey with you. If you want to know more about narrative role-playing, tactical role-playing and such, my YouTube channel, I have a whole series on getting into the hobby. If you want to check that out, I've got some ideas there too. But otherwise, just stay tuned. There's going to be more questions about roleplay and style and things like that. So, I am OmnusI, once more with you here in my lair. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have many safe and profitable ventures in your future. Farewell.